My daughter-in-law mocked my wedding to my new husband in front of all the guests, calling me a ridiculous, desperate old woman. But when my property, valued at $20 million, made the news 3 days later, my son sent me a text message that said exactly this: "Reconciliation dinner at 8 o'clock tonight. Full family. Please, Mom, we need to talk." I showed up punctually with my new husband, Arthur, and a manila folder containing documents that were going to completely destroy their plans for a fake reconciliation. But that was just the end of a story that began 2 weeks ago, on the worst day of humiliation I had ever experienced in my 58 years of life. Let me tell you exactly how a woman everyone believed to be poor and worthless became the worst nightmare of those who despised her. It all started on the Saturday of my wedding. I was standing in front of the mirror in the small community hall we had rented, adjusting the elegant ivory suit I had chosen with so much love to marry Arthur, the man who had given me back the will to live after 3 years of widowhood. 20 guests were waiting outside in the garden decorated with white flowers. The music was playing softly. The officiant was reviewing his papers. Everything was perfect, intimate, exactly as I had dreamed. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels striking the wooden floor with fury. I turned toward the door and felt my whole body tense up. It was Chloe, my daughter-in-law, that 32-year-old woman who had been married to my only son, Ryan, for 4 years, and who, from day one, had made it clear she considered me a burden in their lives. She arrived, dressed in a red dress, so scandalous and provocative it seemed designed specifically to ruin my ceremony. Behind her, with his head down like an obedient dog, came my son. Ryan was 35 years old, but in that moment, he looked like a scared child who knew he was making a mistake but didn't have the courage to stop it. I hadn't invited them. After months of hurtful comments and constant humiliations, I had made the painful decision not to include them in my special day. But there they were, barging in as if they had all the right in the world. Sarah, my best friend and the only person who knew the whole history of suffering I had lived through with Chloe, immediately approached my side. "Mary, do you want me to ask them to leave?" she whispered urgently. But I shook my head. I wasn't going to give that woman the pleasure of seeing me upset. Not on my own day. I walked out of the dressing room with my head held high and walked toward the garden where Arthur was waiting for me next to the makeshift altar. He looked at me with those gray eyes full of tenderness that had won me over 6 months ago when we met at the neighborhood CVS pharmacy on a rainy afternoon. He was an elegant 62-year-old man, a widower like me, a retired engineer who had worked his whole life in the oil industry. We had fallen in love slowly, with the calm of someone who is no longer in a hurry, but knows how to recognize something valuable when they find it. The officiant began to read the wedding vows. I was holding the bouquet of white roses in my trembling hands, trying to concentrate on the words, on the moment, on the promise of a new life. But then I heard the laughter, that high-pitched, metallic, cruel laugh that Chloe used as a weapon whenever she wanted to humiliate someone. "I can't believe we're watching this," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A woman her age dressing up like she's going to prom. It's almost pathetic." I felt the heat rise up my neck. The guests turned around, uncomfortable. The officiant paused, not knowing whether to continue or not. Arthur squeezed my hand tightly, letting me know he wouldn't allow anyone to ruin our moment. But Chloe hadn't finished. She stepped closer, with Ryan following her like a silent, cowardly shadow. "Mom!" "Mary," she said with that fake voice she used when she wanted to feign respect in front of others. "I didn't know you were so desperate to get married again. It's barely been 3 years since Dad died. You forget so quickly." Those words were like a punch straight to the gut. My late husband had been the love of my life for 32 years. We had built everything together from scratch, living paycheck to paycheck, sacrificing our own dreams to give Ryan the best education possible. I had worked doing alterations and tailoring for decades, sewing until my fingers bled, while my husband broke his back in construction jobs to pay for our son's private college tuition. And when my husband finally got sick with cancer, I sold everything of value we had to pay for the treatments that the insurance wouldn't cover. I had done all of that for Ryan, for my only son, and now he was standing there, staring at the ground, without saying a single word while his wife destroyed me publicly. "Chloe, please," Sarah tried to say, stepping between us. This isn't the time or the place. Ah, the faithful sidekick, always defending poor Mary, Chloe replied with contempt. Then she looked me directly in the eyes. And this man, Arthur, right? I guess you haven't told him that you have absolutely nothing, that you live in a rented 2-bedroom apartment, that your Social Security barely covers your groceries. I hope he's not with you for the money, because there's nothing to get from a broke old woman like you. The silence that followed was deathly. I could hear my own ragged breathing, feel the pitying looks of the guests boring into my back. Chloe pulled out her cell phone and started taking pictures of everything, of my suit, of the modest hall, of the flowers on the chairs. This is going straight to social media, she announced with satisfaction. My friends aren't going to believe the circus I was forced to come to, the pathetic wedding of a woman who refuses to accept that her time has passed. It was in that moment that something inside me broke. Not with a crash, but with a silent and definitive click. I looked at my son, waiting, silently begging for him to finally say something, to defend me even just once in all those years of mistreatment. But Ryan kept his gaze fixed on the ground, hands in his pockets, as if none of this was his responsibility. Then I made the hardest and most liberating decision of my life. I let go of the bouquet of roses and let it fall onto the witness table. I took Arthur's hand and squeezed it with all the strength I had left. "We're leaving," I told him with a firm voice. He nodded without hesitating a second, because that wonderful man knew me well enough to know I had reached my limit. We walked together toward the exit of the hall, while Chloe kept laughing behind us, taking more pictures, making poisonous comments about my hunched back, about my low-heeled shoes, about how ridiculous everything was. The guests watched us with a mixture of horror and pity that hurt me more than any insult. Sarah ran after us. "Mary, wait. Don't let her win like this." But I couldn't stay a second longer in that place. Not like this. Not enduring that humiliation in front of the few people who mattered to me. We got into Arthur's car, a modest but well-maintained sedan, and drove away while I fought to hold back the tears that threatened to overflow. I didn't know in that moment that within 72 hours, my entire life would take a turn that no one, absolutely no one, could have anticipated. Much less Chloe and her cruel tongue, much less my cowardly son who had betrayed me with his silence. Because I had a secret that not even Ryan knew, a secret that was about to come to light in the most explosive way possible. But in that moment, driving through the streets while the sun went down, I was just a 58-year-old woman with a broken heart, asking myself at what exact moment I had lost the son I loved so much. Arthur drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, respecting my need to process what had just happened. I looked out the window without really seeing anything, hands clenched in my lap, feeling the humiliation mixing with a rage I had never experienced with such intensity before. Finally, we arrived at his apartment, a cozy place in an older building, but well kept. As soon as he locked the door behind us, I crumbled. I literally collapsed onto the sofa, and the tears I had held back during the whole ride poured out like a flooding river. "You didn't deserve any of that," Arthur said, kneeling in front of me and taking my hands in his. "Nothing that woman said has an ounce of truth." "But Ryan," I managed to articulate between sobs. My own son didn't say a single word. He stood there as if I wasn't even worth defending, as if everything I did for him throughout my entire life meant absolutely nothing. Arthur hugged me while I cried against his chest, staining his light shirt with my runny makeup. He didn't try to give me empty words of comfort. He just held me, let me vent, stroked my hair with that infinite patience that only a truly good man can have. When I finally managed to calm down a little, he made me some chamomile tea and sat next to me. "Mary, there is something I want you to know," he began with a serious tone. "This marriage doesn't need a ceremony to be real. What we have is stronger than any paper or celebration. If you want, we can go to the courthouse tomorrow, sign the necessary documents, and that's it. Just the two of us. No witnesses, no drama." I nodded weakly, grateful to have someone who understood me so deeply. "You're right. The party doesn't matter anymore. Only we matter." That night, I stayed at his apartment. We didn't sleep together in the romantic sense. We simply shared the space like two people who needed each other's company. I lay in his bed while he insisted on sleeping on the couch, and for hours I stared at the ceiling, reliving every moment of humiliation. I thought about Chloe posting those pictures, uploading them to her social media, laughing with her friends about the pathetic old lady who dared to look for love at 58. I thought about my son, about how he had gone from being that sweet boy who hugged me every night before sleeping, to becoming a spineless man who allowed his wife to treat me worse than a stray dog. But above all, I thought about my late husband, John, about how we had fought together to give Ryan all the opportunities we never had. I remembered the nights I sewed until 3 a.m. to finish prom dresses and baptism suits, earning barely enough to supplement my husband's wages. I remembered how we sold our only car when Ryan wanted to study engineering at an expensive university, how we moved to a smaller apartment to be able to pay for his books and materials, how my husband worked 2 jobs simultaneously for 5 years so our son wouldn't have to worry about anything but his studies, and we had succeeded. Ryan graduated with honors, got a good job at a tech company, met Chloe at a corporate conference, and they got married in a lavish wedding that we helped pay for with our last savings. I thought we could finally rest, that our son would take care of us in our old age just as we had taken care of him. But then my husband got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Aggressive, lethal. The experimental treatments, which the health insurance didn't cover, cost thousands of dollars. I sold my sewing machines. I sold the few pieces of jewelry I had. I sold the furniture we had accumulated over decades of marriage. I asked Ryan for help, who was already earning a considerable salary. But Chloe objected. "We can't be funding your parents' problems forever." I remember she told my son during a visit to the hospital, with that icy voice she used when she wanted to seem rational. "We already helped them with the wedding. We already helped them with the apartment last year. At some point, they have to fend for themselves." Helping us with the apartment meant they had borrowed $80,000 from us, money we never saw again because my husband died 6 months later. $80,000 that I had promised to pay back as soon as I could. But with my miserable pension, I barely had enough to eat and pay rent. My husband passed away on a Tuesday afternoon, surrounded only by me and Sarah. Ryan arrived 2 hours after the last breath, with Chloe hanging on his arm, both dressed as if they were coming from some important business meeting. He didn't cry. He didn't hug me. He only asked about the will and the life insurance papers. There was no will. There was no life insurance. There were only debts and a body to cremate because we didn't even have money for a proper burial. After the funeral, Ryan distanced himself completely. The calls became sporadic, the visits non-existent. When I reached out to him, Chloe always had an excuse ready. That they were very busy with work, that they had social commitments, that I had to understand they had their own life. For 3 years, I lived in a loneliness that ate me up inside. Sarah was my only constant company, my only emotional support. She was the one who encouraged me to go out again, who reminded me that I still had the right to be happy, that life didn't end just because my son had abandoned me. And then I met Arthur. It was a chance encounter, almost cinematic in its simplicity. I was at the pharmacy buying blood pressure medication when it started pouring rain. He walked in soaked, laughing at his own bad luck, and our eyes met. We talked while we waited for the rain to let up. He told me he had been a widower for 4 years, that his children lived out of state, that he felt terribly lonely in that apartment full of memories. I told him my story, or at least a summarized version of it, and he listened to me with an attention no one had given me in years. We started meeting for coffee, then to walk in the park, then for dinner at modest diners where we shared plates because neither of us had money to spare. It wasn't a soap opera romance. It was something better. It was genuine companionship, mutual respect, affection that grew slowly but with deep roots. When Arthur proposed to me 6 months after we met, he did it without a ring, without getting down on one knee, without grand gestures. He just took my hand during one of our walks and said, "Mary, I don't want to spend the rest of my days without you. Let's get married." And I said yes, because finally I had found someone who saw me as a complete human being, not as a burden or a nuisance. I decided to tell Ryan about the wedding, not because I expected his blessing, but because I still had the naive hope that maybe this would make him reflect, that maybe my happiness would matter to him even a little. His response was a cold text message. "Congratulations, Mom. Hope you know what you're doing." Nothing else. No call, no visit. Just those words that made his disapproval clear. I didn't invite them to the wedding because I didn't want their negative energy ruining my day. But Chloe had other ideas. She had to make it clear to me that I didn't deserve to be happy, that I didn't deserve a fresh start, that my place was rotting in the loneliness they themselves had created around me. Now, lying in Arthur's bed listening to the sound of cars passing on the street, I wondered if I would ever get my relationship with my son back. I wondered if he would ever understand the damage he had done to me. I wondered if Chloe had finally won. But something inside me, something small but persistent, whispered to me that this story wasn't over yet, that the universe had a strange way of balancing things, that justice would arrive when I least expected it. I had no idea how prophetic that feeling would be. I had no idea that in exactly 72 hours, my entire life would change in a way that not even in my wildest dreams could I have imagined. Because while I was crying in that bed, hundreds of miles away, in a government office, an official was reviewing some very specific documents. Documents related to some rural land in West Texas that my late husband had inherited from his father decades ago. Land we all believed to be useless, arid, without any value. Land that was legally registered in my name since 3 months before my husband's death. Land under which they had just discovered oil deposits worth an incalculable fortune. But I didn't know any of that yet. I only knew that my heart was broken, that my son had betrayed me, and that my daughter-in-law had won this battle. For now, Monday morning, I woke up with puffy eyes and a headache that seemed to split my skull in two. Arthur was already awake, making coffee in the small but tidy kitchen of his apartment. He looked at me with concern when I appeared in the doorway. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked, although the answer was obvious from my appearance. "Almost nothing," I admitted, letting myself fall into one of the chairs at the table. "I can't stop thinking about everything that happened." He placed a cup of coffee in front of me and sat by my side. "Mary, I need to tell you something important, something that might change your perspective on all this a little." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Arthur took a deep breath, as if he were gathering courage. "The land your husband inherited from his father, the acres out in the scrubland north of the city. You know they are in your name, right?" I nodded vaguely. "Yes. John transferred them to my name a few months before he died. He said it was to avoid probate issues later, so I wouldn't have to fight over inheritance with distant relatives. But that land isn't worth anything, Arthur. It's pure, arid desert. No one can farm there. There's no water. There's nothing. John always said it was the most useless inheritance his father had left him." Arthur took my hand gently. "I've worked in the oil industry for over 30 years. I know the movements of the sector. And about 2 months ago, rumors started circulating among colleagues about explorations in that specific area. Geological surveys, test drilling. My heart began to beat faster without me understanding exactly why. And what does that mean? It means that it is possible, just possible, that beneath that land everyone thought was useless, there is something valuable. Oil, natural gas, I don't know for sure. But if the rumors are true, and if the explorations confirm what they suspect, those properties could be worth a fortune." I stared at him, unable to fully process what he was saying. "But that doesn't make sense. My husband owned that land for decades, and it was never worth anything, because they had never done deep seismic studies in that region before. Fracking and exploration technology has advanced a lot. Now they can detect deposits that were impossible to find before." Arthur squeezed my hand. "I don't want you to get your hopes up, because nothing is confirmed yet. But I thought you should know. Just in case." I spent the rest of Monday in a sort of haze. Sarah came to visit me at Arthur's apartment in the afternoon, bringing some clean clothes from my own apartment. When I told her about the conversation with Arthur, her eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "It would be poetic justice," she said, while making tea in the kitchen. "After everything you've suffered, after how they've treated you, for it to turn out you own something valuable. But I also don't want you to suffer another disappointment if it turns out to be nothing." "I know," I sighed. "It's probably just a coincidence, rumors without foundation. That land has always been a waste." Tuesday passed without major news. Arthur and I went to the courthouse and signed the marriage license papers. No ceremony, no witnesses beyond 2 courthouse clerks who didn't even look us in the eyes. Technically, we were already married, but it felt empty, anticlimactic, as if Chloe had managed to steal even that moment from me. My phone rang several times that day. Unknown numbers that I didn't answer. A text from Ryan that said, "Mom, can we talk?" I ignored it. I didn't have the strength to face him yet. I didn't have words to express the level of betrayal I felt. Chloe had uploaded the photos to her social media, just as she promised. Sarah showed them to me, even though I asked her not to. There were the images of my ivory suit, of the modest hall, of the simple flowers. The comments were cruel. How sad when people don't accept their age. My mother-in-law is also desperate for attention. Old people should stay home. I felt nauseous reading those comments from people who didn't even know me, who judged my life based on the poisonous narrative Chloe had constructed. Sarah took the phone out of my hands. "Don't read that trash. Those people know nothing about you, about what you've lived through, about what you're worth." But the words were already etched in my mind, adding to all the other humiliations I had accumulated over the years. Wednesday morning, exactly 3 days after my ruined wedding, the doorbell of Arthur's apartment rang at 9 o'clock sharp. He opened the door and found a man in a suit with a leather briefcase. "Good morning. I'm looking for Mrs. Mary Ramirez." My heart skipped a beat. No one had looked for me by my maiden name in decades. I approached cautiously. "That's me." The man handed me a business card. "I am an attorney representing the Regional Land Management Division for a major energy consortium. I need to speak with you regarding some properties registered in your name in the northern sector of the Arid Hills Basin." My legs almost failed me. Arthur had to hold me by the arm. "Come in, please," he said, inviting the man to enter. We sat in the small living room while the lawyer opened his briefcase and took out several official documents with corporate seals. "Mrs. Ramirez, I'm afraid I bring news that is going to change your life considerably." The man began with a professional tone, but not devoid of warmth. "The land you own has been the subject of extensive geological studies over the last 6 months. We have confirmed the existence of significant oil deposits on your property." The world stopped turning. My breathing stopped. Arthur squeezed my hand so hard it almost hurt. "The deposits are of exceptional quality," the lawyer continued. "We have estimated that the total value of the reserves, considering the extraction contracts and the royalties that correspond to you by law as the owner of the land and mineral rights, amounts to approximately $20 million. $20 million. The words floated in the air like something surreal, impossible, almost comical in their absurdity. Me, who had spent the last 3 years surviving on a pension of $400 a month. Me, who still owed $80,000 on a loan my son had never paid back. Me, whom my daughter-in-law had called a poor old woman barely 72 hours ago. "This is impossible," I managed to murmur. "There has to be a mistake." The lawyer shook his head and spread the documents in front of me. "There is no mistake. The property titles are in order, all in your name. The transfer your late husband made 3 years ago was completely legal and recorded. You are the only legitimate owner of those lands, and therefore of everything found beneath them." I spent the next 2 hours listening to the lawyer explain legal terms I could barely comprehend. Extraction contracts, royalties, percentages, exploitation clauses. My head was spinning trying to process that my life had just changed in the most dramatic and unexpected way possible. "There are several oil companies interested in negotiating with you," the lawyer explained while organizing the documents. "I strongly recommend that you hire an attorney specializing in oil and gas law to advise you in the negotiations. This is too complex to handle alone." When the man finally left, I stayed sitting on the sofa, completely motionless. Arthur was by my side, equally stunned. Sarah, who had arrived just as the lawyer was leaving, looked at us both with her mouth open. "Mary," Sarah said with a trembling voice, "you just became a millionaire." The word sounded strange, foreign, as if she were talking about another person. "It can't be real," I whispered. "Things like this don't happen to me. They never happen." Arthur took my face in his hands, forcing me to look him in the eyes. "Listen to me well. This is completely real. John left you that land because he loved you and wanted to protect you. He didn't know what was underneath, but fate decided that after all your suffering, after everything you have endured, you deserved this. You deserve it, Mary. Every damn penny." The tears began to roll down my cheeks. But this time they weren't tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of disbelief, of relief, of a cosmic justice so perfect it seemed designed by some celestial screenwriter with a very particular sense of humor. Sarah sat on my other side. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted with a broken voice. "I don't even know where to start." "I do," said Sarah, with a smile I hadn't seen on her face in years. "First, you are going to hire the best oil and gas lawyer in the city. Second, you are going to make sure every document is in perfect order. And third, you are going to let the universe handle the rest." By Thursday afternoon, the news had exploded in the local media, not by my initiative, but because some official at the county clerk's office or the Energy Commission had leaked the information to the press. The news broadcasts were talking about the most important oil discovery of the decade on private land. They mentioned my full name. They showed aerial photographs of the scrubland that was now worth a fortune. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, journalists wanting interviews, supposed financial advisors offering their services. I had to turn it off because the anxiety was becoming unbearable. But there was one message that arrived before I turned off the phone. A message from my son Ryan that made the blood freeze in my veins. "Mom, I saw the news. We need to talk urgently. Reconciliation dinner tomorrow, Friday at 8 p.m., at my house. Full family. Please, it's important that you come. I love you. I love you." 2 words he hadn't said to me in more than 3 years. 2 words that magically appeared right after $20 million made the national news. I showed the message to Arthur and Sarah. They both exchanged a look loaded with meaning. "How shameless," Sarah said with disgust. 3 days after publicly humiliating you at your own wedding, now they want family reconciliation, as if you were stupid. Arthur remained thoughtful. "Are you going to go?" "Yes," I answered with a calm that surprised even myself. "I'm going to go. But not alone. You're coming with me." He nodded without hesitation. "Wherever you go, I go." That night I almost didn't sleep, but not out of sadness or anxiety. Something had changed inside me. The Mary who had allowed herself to be trampled on for years. The Mary who had accepted humiliation with her head down. That Mary had died in the garden of that hall 3 days ago. The woman who was now staring at the ceiling in the darkness was someone different. Someone who had hit rock bottom and discovered that at the bottom there was steel. Someone who understood that respect isn't begged for, it's commanded. Someone who no longer had anything to lose because she had lost everything before winning everything. Friday morning, Sarah appeared at Arthur's apartment with a manila folder and the smile of a cat that has just caught a mouse. "What is that?" I asked, pointing to the folder. "This," she said, placing it on the table with a satisfying thud, "is your arsenal. I've been compiling evidence for the last 2 years. Every cruel message from Chloe that you forwarded to me, every conversation where Ryan denied you help when you needed it, the screenshots of the photos Chloe uploaded to social media mocking your wedding, the contract for the $80,000 loan they never paid back, everything." I opened the folder and found everything perfectly organized in dividers with labels, printed text messages, emails, photographs, bank documents. It was a meticulous record of years of emotional and financial abuse. "Sarah," I whispered, overwhelmed. "When did you do all this?" "I've been preparing for this moment for a long time," she replied seriously. "I knew that someday you would need proof, that someday you would have to defend yourself. I didn't imagine it would be under these circumstances. But the universe has its own plans." Arthur reviewed the documents with a critical eye. As an engineer used to precision, he appreciated the meticulousness of Sarah's work. "This is perfect. With this, they can see exactly who they are and what they've done." I spent the rest of the day mentally preparing myself for what was to come. I dressed with care, choosing an elegant but understated outfit. Dark gray dress pants, a cream blouse, a structured blazer. Nothing flashy, nothing that shouted the change in my financial situation, just pure dignity. At 7:30 in the evening, Arthur and I got into his car. The manila folder rested in my lap like a loaded weapon. The drive to Ryan and Chloe's house lasted 20 minutes, which felt like hours. They lived in an exclusive residential area, in a 2-story house with a perfectly manicured front lawn. A house they had bought with the $80,000 loan they had asked me for 4 years ago, promising to pay back the money in monthly installments that never arrived. We parked in front of the entrance. The lights of the house were on. Through the windows, I could see movement, shadows preparing what would surely be an elaborate dinner designed to impress me. "Ready?" Arthur asked, taking my hand. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the folder in my other hand. More than ready. We walked toward the front door. I rang the doorbell. I heard hurried steps approaching. The door opened, and there was Ryan, my son, dressed in a pressed shirt and dress pants, with a smile on his face that didn't manage to hide the greed in his eyes. "Mom," he said with a sugary voice that turned my stomach. "What a joy that you came. And Arthur? Welcome. Come in, please." We entered the house. The aroma of expensive food filled the air. The dining table was set with fine china, crystal glasses, lit candles, and there, coming out of the kitchen with a smile so fake it was laughable, was Chloe. She was wearing an emerald green dress, perfect makeup, discreet jewelry, as if absolutely nothing had happened 3 days ago, as if she hadn't destroyed me publicly, calling me a poor, pathetic old woman. "Mary," she said with a voice that pretended to be warm, "I'm so glad you're here, and congratulations on your marriage." The hypocrisy in her voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I stood in the threshold of the living room without responding to her fake greeting. Arthur remained by my side, tense, with the manila folder under his arm. "Please, sit down," Ryan said, gesturing toward the dining table. "We made your favorite food, pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, just like you liked Dad to make it." The mention of my late husband in that context produced a wave of nausea in me. How dared he invoke his father's memory now, after abandoning me when I needed him most? We sat at the table. Chloe began to serve the food with exaggerated movements of kindness. "I hope it's seasoned well. I know you're very particular with traditional food." I had never been particular about anything. That was another one of her inventions to paint me as a difficult mother-in-law in front of her social circle. Ryan filled the glasses with red wine that probably cost more than I used to spend on food for a whole month. "I want to make a toast," he announced, raising his glass. "To family, to new beginnings, to leaving misunderstandings behind." Misunderstandings. He called years of abandonment and 3 days of public humiliation misunderstandings. Arthur and I didn't raise our glasses. The uncomfortable silence stretched until Ryan lowered his with a nervous laugh. "Okay, I understand you're still upset about Saturday," he said with a conciliatory tone. "And you have every right. Chloe and I have talked a lot about that. Right, honey?" Chloe nodded with an expression of regret so rehearsed it seemed taken from a cheap soap opera. "Mary, I need to apologize. I behaved horribly at your wedding. I was going through a very difficult time at work. I had a lot of stress, and unfortunately, I took it out on you. It was unforgivable." "Stress at work," I repeated with a flat voice. "That's what you call calling me a poor, ridiculous, pathetic old woman in front of all my guests now?" Her face fell slightly, but she recovered her composure quickly. "I know my words were terrible. There is no excuse. I can only say that I am deeply sorry, and I hope that someday you can forgive me." "Mom," Ryan intervened, leaning forward with pleading eyes. "I know I've been a bad son. I know I abandoned you when Dad died. I know I wasn't there for you these last few years. But I want to change that. I want to get our relationship back. You are my mother. You are the most important thing I have." The words sounded nice. Anyone who didn't know the full context might believe they were sincere. But I saw the calculation behind his eyes. I saw how they both looked at each other sideways like actors coordinating their lines. "You saw the news," I said without inflection in my voice. It wasn't a question. Ryan and Chloe exchanged a brief but revealing look. "Yes," my son admitted. "We saw about the land, about the oil. Mom, it's incredible. Dad must be smiling from heaven knowing that he finally left you something valuable that you didn't know existed until 3 days ago," I added, keeping my voice calm. "Something valuable that appeared right after your wife publicly humiliated me, and you stayed silent as always." "Mom, that's not fair," Ryan protested. "I did defend you. I told Chloe afterward that it was wrong. We had a huge argument about it. A huge argument that served for nothing because here she is, smiling as if nothing had happened." Chloe set her fork down on the plate with a metallic sound. "Mary, I understand your anger, truly. But Ryan is right. He did confront me after the wedding. He made me see that I had crossed a line, and that's why I'm here now, trying to make amends. 3 days, I said with an increasingly cold voice. 3 days was how long it took you to want to reconcile after 4 years of total abandonment. How convenient that those 3 days were exactly the time between my ruined wedding and the news of my $20 million. The atmosphere at the table froze. Ryan opened his mouth to protest, but I stopped him by raising a hand. Don't insult me by pretending this is genuine, I continued. Don't insult me by acting as if I were stupid enough not to see what is really happening here. Mom, I swear this isn't about the money, Ryan insisted, with desperation growing in his voice. Yes, the timing is unfortunate, I admit it, but I had been wanting to reach out to you for weeks, wanting to fix things. The news just gave me the final push to do it. Weeks, I repeated with sarcasm. How curious, because I've been waiting 3 years for you to reach out. 3 years, waiting for a call that wasn't to ask me for something. 3 years waiting for you to ask me how I was, if I needed help, if I was even alive. Chloe intervened with a defensive tone. Mary, that's not completely fair. We had our own responsibilities, our jobs, our obligations. We couldn't be watching over you all the time. I didn't ask you to watch over me all the time, I replied, feeling the rage I had been holding back beginning to seep out. I asked for the basics. A call every now and then. A visit on my birthday. Something that made me feel like I still mattered to you. You matter to us, Ryan said, taking my hand across the table. I pulled my hand back immediately, as if his touch burned. He froze, hurt by the rejection. Arthur, who had remained silent, observing everything, finally spoke. I think Mary has something to show you. Something you've been waiting to see. I placed the manila folder on the dining table with a deliberate thud. Ryan and Chloe looked at it with confusion mixed with growing fear. What is that? Chloe asked, her voice higher pitched than usual. This, I said, opening the folder with slow and deliberate movements, is the truth. The complete and documented truth of who you really are. I began to take out the documents one by one, placing them on the table like cards in a deadly game. First, the text messages, screenshots of conversations where Chloe called me a burden, a useless old woman, a problem. Messages where she told Ryan to cut contact with me because I was toxic for his professional success. You sent this in March of last year, I said, pointing to one of the messages. 2 weeks after I called you to tell you I was in the hospital for a blood pressure crisis. I remember no one came to see me. Chloe paled, looking at the documents. Where did you get that? Those were private conversations. Ryan forwarded them to me. I lied, knowing that actually Sarah had recovered some from his phone during a visit, in a moment of clarity, where he still had some conscience left. My son shook his head frantically. Mom, I would never send you those conversations. Then how do you explain that I have them? I retorted. It didn't matter if the source was real or not. What mattered was the content. I took out more documents. Printouts of the social media posts, where Chloe had uploaded the photos of my wedding with mocking comments. Look at the desperate mother-in-law playing prom queen. The likes and cruel comments from her friends. Everything perfectly documented, with dates and times. This is an invasion of my privacy, Chloe protested with a trembling voice. This is evidence of systematic harassment, I corrected. Finally, I pulled out the most important document. The loan contract signed 4 years ago. $80,000 that I lent them for the down payment on this very house where we were sitting. A loan they promised to pay back in monthly installments of $1,200 over 6 years. Do you know how many payments I have received? I asked, placing the contract in front of Ryan. 0. Not a single one. Not even when I sent you messages begging you to help me with even something small. When I didn't have money to buy my medications. When I had to choose between eating or paying rent. Ryan looked at the document with shaking hands. Mom, we were going to start paying you. We just needed time to get stable. 4 years wasn't enough time, I replied with a sharp voice. 4 years living in this house that I financed while you let me rot in an apartment where the heating doesn't work and the walls have mold. Chloe finally exploded. You offered us that money. You said it was to help us get established. We had no obligation to return it if it was a gift. It was a loan. Arthur intervened with a firm voice, pointing to the document. Here is the signature of both of you. Here are the terms clearly established. Loan. Not a gift, with a payment date, with agreed interest. All legal and binding. This is extortion, Chloe shouted, standing up from the table. You come here to our house, accept our dinner, and attack us with papers and accusations. I came because you invited me, I responded, maintaining the calm that I knew was driving her crazy. I came because you wanted family reconciliation. And I came to show you exactly what kind of family we have been. Ryan had tears in his eyes now. I didn't know if they were genuine or calculated. Mom, I know we made mistakes. I know we failed you. But we can fix it. Now that you have resources, now that you can live peacefully, we can start over. We can be a family again. Now that I have resources, I repeated, letting the words float in the poisoned air. That is the important part, right? We couldn't be a family when I was poor. We couldn't reconcile when I had nothing to offer you. But now that $20 million magically appeared, I am worthy of your love again. That's not fair, Ryan exploded, hitting the table with his fist. I have always loved you. You are my mother. The money has nothing to do with it. Then pay me back the $80,000, I said with a glacial voice. If the money really doesn't matter, pay me back what you owe me. Tomorrow. Full bank transfer. The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe and Ryan looked at each other with evident panic on their faces. Of course, they didn't have $80,000 available. They probably lived to the limit of their income, maintaining this lifestyle they projected on social media. We can't give you that amount immediately, Ryan finally admitted. But we can make a payment plan, something reasonable. You had 4 years to make a payment plan, I responded. 4 years where not a cent ever arrived. You didn't even send me a message asking if I needed help when you knew perfectly well that my pension was miserable. We thought Arthur was helping you, Chloe shouted desperately. That's why you married him, isn't it? For his money. Arthur laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. I live on a retired engineer's pension, modest but sufficient for my needs. I don't have properties. I don't have large investments. I married Mary because she is an extraordinary woman who deserves to be loved. Something you clearly never understood. Chloe let herself fall into her chair with her hands covering her face. Finally, the perfect mask was cracking. What do you want from us? She asked with a broken voice. Did you come here just to humiliate us? To rub your new fortune in our faces? I came here because you invited me with lies, I responded. I came here so you can see the consequences of your actions, so you understand that I am not the foolish old woman you can manipulate when it suits you. I took out another document from the folder. This was new, just prepared by Sarah with the help of her law firm. This is a formal lawsuit for the payment of the loan, plus accumulated interest. The total now amounts to $93,000. You have 30 days to pay, or you will face property foreclosure. Ryan took the document with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the legal lines without being able to really process what he was reading. Mom, please, you can't do this to us. We're going to lose the house. I almost lost my life trying to survive on nothing while you lived here comfortably. I replied without a shred of compassion in my voice. I think it's time you experience a little of the insecurity you made me feel for years. Chloe stood up abruptly, making her chair fall backward with a crash. This is revenge. Cheap revenge from a resentful woman who can't accept that her son grew up and has his own life. This is justice, I corrected her, standing up as well. Arthur stood up beside me, imposing and protective. Justice for years of mistreatment, for public humiliation, for abandonment when I needed you most, for calling me a poor old woman 3 days ago thinking you could get away with it. All this because you inherited money by pure luck, Chloe screamed, with her face red with anger. You didn't do anything to earn it. You just had the luck that your husband died and left you lands that coincidentally turned out to be worth millions. And now you feel superior. My husband died after I sold everything we owned to pay for his treatments. I responded with a voice trembling with contained fury. He died knowing he had left you in poverty. And you two took advantage of that poverty to treat me like trash. So yes, maybe it was luck that those lands were worth something, but the difference between you and me is that I never used my situation to humiliate others. Ryan was weeping openly now. Mom, please, forgive me. I was a coward. I was a bad son. But please don't destroy my life. We can fix it. We'll pay you everything. Just give us time. I looked at my son, at that 35-year-old man crying like a child, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt the maternal impulse to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, to forgive as I had forgiven so many times before. But then I remembered his silence at my wedding. I remembered years of unanswered calls. I remembered his indifference when I told him there were days I didn't eat so I could buy medicine, and the maternal impulse died as quickly as it had appeared. You have 30 days, I repeated, putting the documents back in the folder. 30 days to get the money or face legal consequences. And one more thing, I took out the last document from the folder. It was my will, newly drafted with Sarah's help. This is a copy of my new will. In it, I specify that no asset, property, or resource of mine shall be inherited by Ryan Ramirez or his wife Chloe. The entire estate is designated elsewhere. The document fell onto the table with a sound that resonated like a gunshot in the absolute silence that followed my words. Ryan took it with hands so shaky he could barely hold it. His eyes scanned the legal lines over and over, as if by reading them enough times the words might magically change. "Mom, no," he whispered with a broken voice. "You can't do this. I'm your only son, your only family. You stopped being my family a long time ago," I responded with a calm that surprised even me. Family doesn't abandon. Family doesn't humiliate. Family doesn't exploit. You decided what kind of relationship you wanted with me when you chose money over love. Now I am making the same decision. Chloe snatched the document from Ryan's hands and read it frantically. Her face went through a complete range of emotions in seconds: shock, anger, fear, and finally something that looked like genuine terror. "This can't be legal. You can't disinherit your own son just like that." "I can, and I did," I confirmed. "I consulted with the best estate lawyers in the city. This document is perfectly legal and registered. My fortune, every penny of it, will be destined for charitable organizations. To Sarah, who has been more family to me than you ever were, and to Arthur, who showed me in 6 months more love than you gave me in 4 years." Arthur squeezed my hand. I knew the mention of him in the will was new to him too, but he showed no surprise, only silent support. Ryan slumped into his chair as if his legs could no longer hold him. "All this time," he murmured, looking into the void. "All this time I was waiting, planning, thinking that when you died I would finally have something to compensate for all the sacrifices I made." "What sacrifices?" I finally exploded, losing my composure. "What sacrifices did you make, Ryan? You had everything. Your father and I killed ourselves working to give you education, clothes, food, opportunities we never had. We paid for an expensive private college when you could have gone to a state school. We bought your first car when we could barely pay the rent. We gave you everything, and the only thing we asked in return was respect. And you couldn't even give us that." My voice had raised in volume until it became almost a shout. Years of repressed pain finally came to the surface like lava from a volcano that had been contained too long. "I sacrificed my relationship with my friends," Ryan shouted back. "I sacrificed job opportunities in other cities because you wanted me to stay close. I sacrificed my freedom because there was always something you needed. There was always some emergency. There was always some reason why I had to be available for you. I asked you for help 3 times in 4 years, I responded with an icy voice. 3 times. One when your father was dying and we needed money for treatments. Another when I was in the hospital for blood pressure. And the third, when the landlord threatened to evict me because I couldn't pay the rent. 3 times in 4 years is your definition of controlling." Ryan had no answer for that. Chloe tried to intervene, but I raised my hand, stopping her. "And you," I said, turning toward her with all the accumulated fury. "You who from day one saw me as a threat, who poisoned the relationship between my son and me with your toxic comments. Who put it in his head that I was a burden? Who treated me like trash every chance you got? I was just protecting my marriage," Chloe shouted with tears running down her perfect makeup. "You were always there, always needing something, always making Ryan feel guilty. We couldn't build our life with your constant shadow over us." "My constant shadow," I repeated with bitterness. "You call a woman who saw you once every 3 months a constant shadow? Who never showed up unannounced? Who never demanded anything other than basic love and respect?" Arthur stood up, sensing the situation was escalating dangerously. "I think it's time to leave." "Mary, you already said what you came to say." He was right. There was nothing more to achieve here. I picked up the manila folder and made sure all the important documents were inside. Chloe was still crying in her chair, her green dress now wrinkled, her makeup runny. Ryan had his head in his hands, sobbing. 30 days for the loan," I repeated while walking toward the door. "After that, my lawyers will proceed with the foreclosure. And regarding the will, it is signed, sealed, and registered. There is no possible appeal." "Mom, wait." Ryan ran after me, grabbing my arm. I looked at him and saw for the first time in years something that might have been genuine regret in his eyes. "Please, give me a chance to fix it. Just one chance. You had 4 years of chances," I responded, freeing my arm gently. "Every day you didn't call was a missed chance. Every time you ignored my messages was a missed chance. And definitely, every second you stayed silent while your wife destroyed me at my own wedding was the last chance you had." "But I'm your son," he said with a broken voice. "That has to mean something." I looked at him with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "You are my son biologically, but family is more than blood, Ryan. Family is respect, it's love, it's being present in difficult times. And you were none of those things." We left the house and walked toward the car under the light of the street lamps illuminating the exclusive residential street. I could hear Chloe screaming inside the house, probably blaming Ryan for everything, probably already planning her next move. We got into the car and Arthur drove in silence for several minutes. I looked out the window, feeling a strange mixture of liberation and sadness. I had done the right thing. I knew I had done the right thing, but it hurt anyway. "Do you regret it?" Arthur asked finally when we were close to his apartment. "No," I answered honestly. "I don't regret confronting them. I don't regret showing them the consequences of their actions. But it does hurt that it had to come to this. It hurts to have lost my son this way." Arthur parked the car and turned to look at me directly. "You didn't lose your son, Mary. He lost himself a long time ago. You just stopped pretending he was still there." That night, lying in the dark, I thought about everything that had happened. In 1 week I had experienced more emotions than I had felt in years. Humiliation, devastation, surprise, empowerment, and finally, a kind of bitter peace. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. A message from Sarah. "I saw your car outside Ryan's house. How did everything go?" I replied with a brief summary of the confrontation. Her answer arrived almost immediately. "I am proud of you. Finally, you put yourself first." She was right. For the first time in my entire adult life, I had put myself first. I hadn't given in to emotional manipulation. I hadn't allowed maternal guilt to make me back down. I had maintained my boundaries, even when it hurt to do so. I wondered what Ryan would do now. If he would really try to get the money to pay the loan, or if he would simply let the foreclosure proceed. I wondered if Chloe would stay with him now that the prospect of inheriting millions had disappeared. I wondered if someday my son would wake up and see what he had lost. But for the first time in years, those questions didn't keep me awake. It was no longer my responsibility to save Ryan from the consequences of his own decisions. It was no longer my job to sacrifice my dignity to maintain a relationship that only existed in my imagination. Arthur appeared in the bedroom doorway with 2 cups of hot tea. He sat on the edge of the bed and handed me one. "Can't sleep?" "Too many things in my head," I admitted, taking the cup gratefully. "Everything is going to be okay," he said with that quiet certainty I appreciated so much in him. "The worst is over. Now all that's left is to live." The following days were a whirlwind of legal and financial activity. Sarah connected me with the best oil and gas lawyer in the region, a man named Ansel, 60 years old with 40 years of experience in the energy sector. We met in his elegant office downtown, where we reviewed every detail of the contracts the oil companies wanted to sign with me. "Mrs. Mary," Ansel said, while organizing the documents on his mahogany desk, "you have something extraordinary in your hands. This land doesn't just contain oil. It contains extremely high-grade crude. The 3 biggest companies in the country are competing for extraction rights. That gives us exceptional negotiating power." We spent hours discussing percentages, royalties, environmental protection clauses, extraction timelines. My head was spinning with all the technical information, but Ansel had the patience to explain every term until I understood it completely. The most important thing, he told me seriously, is that you maintain control over your properties. Many landowners make the mistake of completely selling their rights for a large immediate sum. But if you structure this correctly with royalties and percentages, your income will be constant for decades. Your children, your grandchildren, could benefit from this. The mention of children produced a pang of pain that I tried to hide. I don't have grandchildren, and my son is out of my will. Ansel looked at me with understanding that suggested he had seen similar situations before. I understand. Then, we will structure everything to maximize your personal income and that of your designated beneficiaries. We can also create a trust for charity work, if that is your wish. During that first week after the disastrous scene with Ryan and Chloe, my phone didn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers that I blocked systematically. Messages from people claiming to be distant cousins. Family friends I hadn't seen in decades. Acquaintances who suddenly remembered how wonderful I had always been to them. But the messages that affected me most were Ryan's. They arrived at any time of day and night. At first, they were desperate. "Mom, please, we need to talk. You can't do this." Then they became pleading. "I beg you, give me a chance to show you I can change." And finally, when the 30-day deadline for the loan payment approached, they became aggressive. "This is cruel. You are destroying me for revenge. Dad would be disappointed in you." That last line hit me like a punch. The idea that my late husband would be disappointed in me for defending myself, for demanding respect, for refusing to continue being trampled on. But then I remembered all the times my husband had expressed concern about how Ryan was changing after marrying Chloe. I remembered his words in the hospital shortly before dying. "Mary, don't let anyone make you feel less than you are worth, not even our son." At that moment, I didn't fully understand what he meant. I thought the pain and medications were making him speak nonsense. But now, years later, his words took on a deep and prophetic meaning. Sarah visited me almost daily, keeping me updated on the legal movements. Ryan hired a lawyer. She informed me one afternoon while we drank coffee in Arthur's small living room. "He is trying to contest the will, alleging undue influence from Arthur over you." I laughed humorlessly. Undue influence. As if I didn't have my own brain to make decisions. "It's a desperate strategy," Sarah explained. "His lawyer knows he has no case, but they are probably doing it to pressure you, to make you feel guilty, so you cave." "I'm not going to cave," I said with a firmness that surprised even myself. "I have caved my whole life. I have put the needs of others above mine for 58 years. It's over." Arthur, who was listening from the kitchen while making dinner, poked his head out with a proud smile. "That's my wife." The word wife still sounded strange, but wonderful. We had gotten married in circumstances so chaotic that we had barely had time to process that we were now husband and wife. But every day that passed, every small gesture of affection, every deep conversation in the early morning, confirmed to me that this had been the right decision. Meanwhile, the news about my fortune remained a topic of conversation in the city. Reporters had tried to contact me for interviews, which I rejected systematically. I didn't want media attention. I didn't want to be the spectacle of the moment. I just wanted peace. But peace was difficult to find when Chloe had started a campaign on social media, painting me as a vengeful and cruel mother-in-law. Posts where she presented herself as the victim of a bitter woman who couldn't stand seeing her son happy. Posts where she talked about the loan as if it had been a gift that I was now claiming unjustly. Her followers, who didn't know the full story, supported her unconditionally. The comments were brutal. "Toxic mothers-in-law are the worst. Poor girl, having to deal with a witch like that. Money brings out the worst in people." Sarah wanted us to respond publicly, to show all the evidence we had. But Arthur convinced me not to enter that game. "People who know you know the truth," he told me wisely. "Strangers on the internet are going to have an opinion no matter what you do. Don't waste your energy trying to convince people who have already decided to believe a narrative." He was right. Letting go of the need to justify myself to strangers was liberating in a way I didn't expect. On day 25 after our confrontation, a certified letter arrived from Ryan's lawyers. I opened it with trembling hands while Arthur and Sarah were present for moral support. The letter was long, full of legal jargon, but the central message was clear. Ryan offered to pay $30,000 immediately as a show of good faith, and the rest in monthly payments over 5 years. "It's a ridiculous offer," Sarah ruled after reading it. $30,000 when he owes 93, and he wants 5 more years to pay the rest? He is trying to manipulate you again. Ansel, my oil lawyer who now handled this civil case, agreed completely. He is betting that you will cave out of pity or maternal guilt. It is a common tactic. Reject the offer and let's proceed with the foreclosure. But something in me hesitated. Not for Ryan or for Chloe, but for a small part of me that still remembered the boy who had been my son. The boy who hugged me when he had nightmares. The teenager who defended me when a neighbor disrespected me. The young man who cried on my shoulder when he wasn't accepted into his first-choice university. "What if I give him one last chance?" I asked in a low voice. Sarah looked at me with incredulity. "Mary, after everything he did to you?" "Not for him," I clarified. "For me. To be able to close this chapter knowing I did everything possible. That I gave him every opportunity, and some he didn't deserve." Arthur took my hand. "If that is what you need to have peace, I support you. But it has to be on your terms, not his." So with Ansel's help, we drafted a counteroffer. $50,000 immediately and the rest in monthly payments of $5,000 for 9 months. Total, 1 year to settle the entire debt. If a single payment was missed, the foreclosure would proceed automatically without further warnings. Ryan's response arrived 2 days later. He accepted the terms. The $50,000 were transferred to my account in less than 24 hours. Sarah investigated the origin of the money and discovered they had emptied their retirement savings and taken out a home equity loan against the value of the house. "They are destroying themselves financially," Sarah commented, with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "They are taking responsibility for their debts," I corrected, something they should have done 4 years ago. But the money transfer didn't come alone. Along with it came a message from Ryan that said simply, "Mom, I hope this shows that I am trying to change, that I am trying to make things right. Please, give me a chance to talk to you. Just us two. No Chloe, no Arthur, no lawyers, just mother and son." I looked at the message for long minutes without knowing what to answer. Arthur, who was reading over my shoulder, kissed me on the forehead. "It's your decision, Mary. No one can make it for you." 3 days passed before I finally responded. "Meet me at Central Coffee. This Thursday at 3 in the afternoon. Just you and me." It was a public, neutral place where there was little risk of dramatic scenes. On Thursday, I arrived 15 minutes early. I sat at a table by the window, ordering a coffee I barely touched. My hands were shaking slightly, although I tried to maintain composure. Arthur and Sarah had wanted to accompany me, but I asked them to give me this space. I needed to face this alone. Ryan arrived punctually at 3. He looked different, thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, his hair less groomed than usual. He sat in front of me with cautious movements, as if fearing that any sudden gesture would make me flee. "Thank you for coming," he said with a hoarse voice. "I wasn't sure you would accept." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I needed to hear what it is you really want to tell me, without Chloe writing the script." He flinched at the mention of his wife. "Chloe and I are separating." The news surprised me, although it shouldn't have. "Because of the money?" "Because of everything," he replied, looking at his untouched coffee. "When she saw that you really had changed your will, when she realized there was no fortune to inherit, she showed her true face. She told me she had wasted years of her life with me, waiting for the day we would be rich thanks to your inheritance. That I was useless for not having maintained a better relationship with you. That all this was my fault. And only now you see who she really is?" I asked, without being able to hide the sarcasm. "You warned me," he said with a broken voice. 4 years ago, when Dad had just died, you told me Chloe was changing me, that she was pushing me away from what was important, and I yelled at you. I told you that you were a controlling mother-in-law who couldn't let go of her son." I remembered that conversation. It had been one of the last times we had spoken sincerely before the estrangement became complete. "I didn't come here for you to give me pity, Ryan," I said firmly. "If your marriage is being destroyed, it is a consequence of decisions you made. Decisions to allow someone to alienate you from your family. Decisions to stay silent when they humiliated me. I know. he said, with tears beginning to roll down his cheeks. I know, and I have no excuse. I was a coward. I was a bad son. I allowed the fear of conflicts with Chloe to be more important than defending you. And now I have lost everything. My marriage, my relationship with you, my integrity. You haven't lost everything, I said with a softer voice. You still have your job, your health, your life ahead of you. What you lost was the comfort of living without consequences. Ryan wiped his tears with the back of his hand. Dad would be so disappointed in me. Yes. I agreed without sugarcoating the truth. He would be. Your father sacrificed his whole life for you. He worked until his body collapsed to give you opportunities, and you took those opportunities and used them to distance yourself from us when we were no longer useful to you. Can I fix it? He asked, with genuine desperation in his voice. Is there any way to recover even part of what we lost? I took a deep breath before responding. I don't know, Ryan. Honestly, I don't know. The damage you did to me, that you did to me by staying silent while your wife destroyed me, that damage is deep. It doesn't heal with apologies or debt payments. Then what do I do? He pleaded. Tell me what to do to start repairing this. Become the man your father wanted you to be, I responded. Not for me, not to recover an inheritance that no longer exists for you, but because it is the right thing. Go to therapy, work on yourself, learn to have a backbone, and maybe, just maybe, in a few years we can have some kind of civil relationship. A few years, he repeated with a broken voice. Ryan, you abandoned me for 4 years. You can't expect me to forgive and forget everything in 4 weeks. Trust is built slowly, but it is destroyed in an instant, and you destroyed it completely. We sat in silence for several minutes. I observed my son, this man who had come out of my body, whom I had raised with so much love and sacrifice, and I felt a complex mixture of emotions. It was no longer pure rage. It was no longer devastating pain. It was something more like the sadness of grief, the recognition that the relationship we once had died and maybe would never completely resurrect. I am going to pay every penny I owe you, he said finally. The $5,000 monthly, without fail, until you are paid off. Not because you are forcing me legally, but because it is the least I can do. Good, I nodded, and I am going to seek professional help. A therapist. I need to understand how I reached this point, how I became someone who betrayed the person who loved me most in this world. Also good. He stood up slowly. Can I hug you? The question caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to keep the distance that protected me from pain. But another part, that maternal part that never dies completely no matter how much damage it receives, nodded slightly. Ryan hugged me carefully, as if I were something fragile that could break. And maybe I was. Maybe we were all fragile in ways we only discovered when we broke. I didn't return the hug completely, but I didn't pull away either. It was the closest to reconciliation we could be in that moment. I love you, Mom, he whispered against my shoulder. I know I have no right to say it after everything, but it's true. It always has been. Love without actions is just words, I responded softly. Show it to me with time, with consistency, with real change. Then maybe I can believe you. When I left the coffee shop, Arthur was waiting for me in the car parked half a block down. He hadn't been able to resist being close in case I needed him. I got in and let myself fall into the seat with an exhausted sigh. How was it? He asked with concern. Sad, I responded. It was sad, but necessary. We drove back to the apartment in comfortable silence. That night, lying next to Arthur, I thought about the whole road traveled. From the humiliation at my wedding to the confrontation with my son, from discovering my fortune to setting boundaries I had never before had the courage to impose. The following months passed with a mixture of extraordinary changes and comforting routines. The negotiations with the oil companies concluded successfully. Ansel had structured contracts that guaranteed me substantial monthly income for decades. Arthur and I bought a small but beautiful house in a quiet area by the ocean. Galveston, maybe, or a quiet spot on the coast. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that shouted wealth, just a home where we could live in peace. Sarah received a generous amount that allowed her to expand her law firm and hire more staff. She cried when I handed her the check, insisting it was too much. Without you, I wouldn't have survived these years, I told her, hugging her. This isn't charity, it's justice. I established foundations to support older women in vulnerable situations, to pay medical bills for people without resources, for educational scholarships, for young people from working-class families like the one I had. Ryan met his monthly payments religiously. Every $5,000 arrived on the first day of each month without fail. Occasionally he sent me brief messages, photos of him in therapy sessions, updates on his divorce in progress, small attempts to reconnect that I responded to with courtesy, but without completely opening the doors of my heart yet. A year after that ruined wedding, Arthur and I organized a small ceremony renewing our vows, this time on the beach in front of our new house, with Sarah as the only witness, without drama, without conflict. Just two people who loved each other, promising to accompany each other for whatever remained of the journey. While the sun set over the ocean and Arthur took my hand, I thought about my late husband, about how he had transferred that land to my name months before dying, as if he knew that someday I would need it, as if even from the grave he continued taking care of me. "Thank you," I whispered to the wind, not knowing if I was speaking to my deceased husband, to the universe, or simply to myself for having finally found the courage to demand the respect I always deserved. Life had taught me that justice sometimes arrives in unexpected ways, that respect isn't begged for, it's commanded, that true love doesn't require humiliation or sacrifice of dignity, and that never, absolutely never, is it too late to start valuing oneself. At my 58 years, I had learned the most important lesson of all, that my value didn't depend on how much money I had in the bank, but on how much respect I demanded from those around me, and that was a wealth that no one, ever, could take away from me.